I know what you're thinking. The title of the video says a tribute to my grandfather. So what are we doing at a dam? This was our fishing spot. When I was a kid, we would come here every weekend during the summer. He had a cabin not far from here. Right over here someplace at a place called Albert Beach. Whenever we came here, he tried to park under this tree as much as possible. It was almost like his own private spot. I'm doing this video today because it's his birthday. He passed away almost 29 years ago, and the last time we fished here was 30 years ago. So why am I not doing this next year, I hear you ask? Well, I want to celebrate his life, not his death. I'd like to tell you 3 stories that happened to him here. One that was kind of scary, and kind of funny at the same time. One that was terrifying, I should know I was there. And the other one was truly terrifying, but with an ending that will, well, I'll let you decide. Let me tell you about the man first. His name is Eugene Laramie. He worked in construction. He was a bigger guy, about 6 foot tall, heavy set, in his later years anyway. He joked around a little bit, and most of the time, he was a serious person. When he asked you to do something sometimes, you felt like saying yes sir. When he was about 20, his brother set him up on a blind date, and the woman he met that night would become his wife of 55 years. They had 2 children, my Uncle Roger and my mother Helen, who passed away from cancer when I was 2 years old. We lived just a few blocks away from my grandparents, so I'd visit them all the time. It didn't matter what time you visited them either. My grandmother would always try to get you to eat. As I mentioned earlier, in the summer, during the weekends, we'd go to the cabin and come here to do some fishing. He had an Econoline E350 Ford van, which he converted into a motorhome. In the back there was a bed, and when you opened up the side door, there would be a little cooking area. A small cabinet with a little propane stove and upper cabinets to hold dishes and some canned food. Now for story number 1. One day my grandparents went to the cabin to get it ready for the summer. It was a late spring and the weather was mild. Afterwards they decided to come here to do some fishing. I don't know if it was a good or a bad day of fishing, or if he was just tired, but they decided to stay here overnight. They crawled into bed and went to sleep. Sometime during the night my grandmother woke up because she was getting kind of cold. It got cold over the night, and so naturally inside the van it got kind of chilly as well. She decided to turn on the propane stove to heat up the van. She turned on one of the elements, and as soon as she struck the match, there was an instant flash fire. As it turned out, one of the dials for the stove wasn't working properly and was slowly leaking propane into the van. If it wasn't for my grandmother waking up because it was cold, they probably never would have woken up at all. Instead, all that happened was a little fire on the shag carpet and all the hair on their heads and my grandfather's facial hair being completely burnt off. Okay, for the second story. Many moons ago, the water level here was much lower than it was before. As you can see under those sluices, there's maybe a foot of space. A sluice is that place right under the dam there. You know what, let's go for a little walk and I'll tell the story over there. Sorry for the bumpy ride. It's kind of rough over here. It was never like this before. I'm sorry, I just can't see what's happening. There's so much glare on the LCD screen here. This platform and these signs are new. Well, new for me. I haven't been here for 30 years, so this is totally new for me. Before, there used to be boulders and rocks that went down into the river. There was never this observation area. But you could walk up to the dam with no fencing Nothing. All you had to do was walk onto the boulders that were here and you'd be at the river. People used to jump off the rocks that were here and go down the river a little bit, then catch themselves and swim back to shore. It was insanity. Sorry, just watching my steps. It's kind of rough over here. So, for the next story, my grandparents, my brother, and myself came here to do some fishing. He parked under the tree like he usually did. That day, my grandfather's brother showed up with his fishing boat, so we decided to come onto the river here to do some fishing. Stupidly, me and my brother did not put on our life jackets. We were quite young at the time. I don't even know how old we were. We were quite young. I thought I was a good swimmer. I took swimming lessons, and so did Eugene, my brother. So we got into the boat, and let me back up. Yeah, there you can see the dam. So we started fishing. Where's my finger? We started fishing right about here. Yeah, that looks about right. And we threw the anchor over. At that time, the water didn't churn this bad. They'd only have one or two of these sluices. That's these things right here. They'd only have one or two of them open. So we didn't feel any concern when we started fishing into this area. After we threw the anchor over, I noticed that we were sort of drifting closer to the dam. At that time, the water would be about 6 feet lower, maybe even 7 feet lower than what it is right now. I mentioned it to my uncle that it looked like we were getting closer, and he said, "Oh, not to worry, the anchor's going to catch us." He said that when we got to about here. Well, the anchor didn't catch us, and we went into that sluice right there that has a sign right above it. And that one had water churning in it, sort of like what you can see over here happening. We were slammed into this close wall here. You could not imagine how quickly me and my brother put our life jackets on. It was terrifying. My uncle was trying his best to start the motor and control the boat at the same time. These things are huge. They're like double garages. Sorry, I had a little interruption there. So we were slammed into the walls a few times. My uncle was doing his best to control the boat and get the motor going at the same time. Eventually he got it going, and we came flying out of that sluice and coming up the river. My grandma could only watch in terror from the shoreline of everything that was happening. When we got back to shore, she was in tears. My grandma and grandpa spoke French for a little bit. It was pretty much decided that we were not allowed in the boat ever again. Well, understandable. She was terrified for our safety, so my grandpa always listened to what she said. Somebody at Manitoba Hydro must have heard what happened, because the next weekend when we came to do our fishing, the water level is where you see it now. So they must have heard about our incident and raised the water level on this side of the river. Now for the third story. This one still moves me even to today. Now for the third story. This one moves me even to this day. My grandpa did that walk that we just did from that tree all the way over here. And over here, in this area, is where you'd find a little pool of minnows. So he'd try catching some and use them for bait. One day, he was just walking around here, looking around, and he slipped into the river. Right away, he caught hold of a boulder. Right away he caught hold of a boulder, but with his head underwater most of the time, and him being a bigger guy and kind of older in age, he had problems lifting himself out of the water. He remembered thinking to himself how he didn't want to die. At that instant, he felt a calm rush over him, and he felt relaxed. He looked up out of the water, and he saw my mother standing before him. She pointed down at the boulder by his hand, and there was a large gap in that boulder. He put his fingers into that gap, and with strength he didn't even know he had, he pulled himself out of the water. He walked back to the van and dried himself off. Just trying to walk on the rocks again. He walked back to the van, drying himself off, and telling the story to my grandmother. I never did hear what my grandma's response was to that. Later that day, one of his friends came by to do some fishing, and he told the story to him. As he was telling the story over by where it happened, my grandpa went silent. The boulder he was clinging to, the only crack that was there was barely thick enough to put his fingernail into. And as he would say, that's when he realized the heavenly spirit of my mother came down and saved his life. Now, I was young at the time when he first told me this story, and I'd always know he'd joke around from time to time. But with the look on his face and the way he would tell the story, you knew he wasn't kidding around. He was serious. He truly felt that my mother had come down from heaven and saved his life. Now me, I'm not a religious person. I don't believe in heaven or hell, angels or demons, but I do believe in spirits. And I do believe that my mother's spirit did save his life that day. What do you think happened? I want to thank you for joining me on this and sharing these 3 stories with you. There are many more stories of my grandfather, but too many to share. And these are the only 3 I could remember that happened in this location. So thank you for coming along and being here with me. It means a lot.